there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
This little fellow is called a bearded dragon. He's from Australia. He's an innocent little beast. He sits there in the sand and hunts flies. I think he's gorgeous. But he and his kind have had a tough time of it in art. Their behaviour misunderstood, their appearance mocked, their reputations blackened. Art's been nasty to lizards, and perhaps the most unfortunate of the many unfortunate lizards scattered about art's darkest corners is the one who's been forced into playing a leading role in Caravaggio's early masterpiece, that exceptionally puzzling meeting of human and reptilian ambition, Boy Bitten by a Lizard. Why would a lizard bite this boy? Who is he? What does it all mean? And why has Caravaggio bothered to paint it? These are tricky questions, and unfortunately, we can't answer them here in this delightful reptilian company. No, we have to go somewhere dangerous and edgy, somewhere murderous and anxious. We have to go somewhere where even the lizards keep out of sight. We have to go to Rome. Even today, you have to keep your wits about you in Rome. Watch your back, watch your money, watch your girl. But back in 1592, it was much, much worse. The mean streets of Rome were a notoriously dangerous terrain. Thieves, gypsies, vagabonds, brigands on the run, prostitutes on the make, taverns full of card sharps and pickpockets, out-of-work soldiers looking for action. It was violent, horrid, scary. No place, certainly, for a sensitive young soul. So it's a good job Caravaggio wasn't one of those. Caravaggio was from Milan. His proper name was Michelangelo Merisi, but he grew up just east of Milan in the small town of Caravaggio, so that's what they began calling him. When he fetched up in Rome in 1592, he was fatherless, motherless, penniless, hungry, angry, and very difficult. Oh, so difficult. Caravaggio had trained as a painter in Milan, but that meant nothing here. Rome in the 1590s was already packed with painters on the make. From all over Italy they flocked, hungry for work, desperate to succeed. Every one of them looking for a gimmick in their art, a twist, something that made them stand out. Caravaggio lived in 10 different places in his first year in Rome. 10! It was a restless, fraught, uncomfortable life. Because if you were at the bottom of the artistic heap, as he was, unnoticed, with no reputation, then the only way to make a living was out here in the streets, hawking your art in the markets, selling it to passers-by for a pittance. His first biographer complains that he was churning out heads for a groat apiece. He'd do 3 of them in a day. Now, I don't know how much a groat is worth, but it can't be much. One of the first pictures we know that Caravaggio sold somewhere out here, for a few groats perhaps, showed a boy with a flower in his hair being bitten by a lizard. A most unusual subject. What could it possibly mean? Caravaggio's real teacher was out here, the street. There's a famous story, which I don't think is true, but which must have been invented for a reason, of someone showing him a statue by the great Greek Phidias and asking him what he could learn from it. Nothing, replied Caravaggio, ignoring the statue and turning instead to the people in the street. Nature, he said, is my only teacher. What's certainly true is that Caravaggio had begun putting outrageously real people into his pictures. Characters from the street, the gypsies who told your fortune and stole your money, the roustabouts from the tavern, soldiers, drinkers, card sharps, hustlers, people who'd lived. They're Sid Jameses and Judi Denches, rather than Brad Pitts and Cameron Diaz's. And among this fabulous cast of character actors, the swarthy and worried face of Caravaggio himself began popping up in the action. All these hustlers and artists who'd slunk into Rome looking for work were desperate to find someone rich and powerful enough to take them under their wing and protect them. Caravaggio found just such a sugar daddy right under his nose, a few hundred yards away from where he was flogging his pictures in the streets, Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte. Del Monte was immensely cultured and kindly. He had a particular passion for music and collected castratos as well as painters. Caravaggio painted an exquisite series of musicians for Del Monte, with carefully observed musical instruments that would have come from the Cardinal's own collection. Now, music has always played a very ambiguous role in art. It was Shakespeare who said, "If music be the food of love, play on." And music has always stood for a pleasure, a wonderful moment in life that happens but then passes. And the message of that painting, produced for Cardinal Del Monte, is that life is short, but death that follows it is eternal. It must have been Del Monte who got Caravaggio his most prestigious commission so far, here in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi, the French church, just 2 minutes away from Del Monte's palazzo. The first of these was unveiled in 1600. These are the paintings that made Caravaggio famous. And you can see why straight away. No one else had ever made religious art like this before. Usually, the stories of the Bible are set out there somewhere in the clouds in the distance. But this looks like an eyewitness account from someone who was actually there. This is St. Matthew being chosen by Jesus. Matthew was a tax collector, but Jesus has tracked him down to this gloomy tavern and reminded him of his vocation. The most sensational thing about this picture is that it's set in a simple Roman tavern of the kind that Caravaggio and his cronies used to frequent. The Inn of the Blackamoor, the Inn of the Wolf, they're all around here. And the characters in the picture, they're Caravaggio's buddies too. Street types, tavern goers. They had no business being in a Bible painting, but because they are there, they make it feel so terribly real. On the other side of the chapel, we see the other end of Matthew's story, his martyrdom. He's in a Roman bathhouse being murdered. But can you see that face illuminated in the darkness at the back, the one with the haunted, sweaty expression? That's Caravaggio himself, putting himself into his own picture as he was wont to do. With Caravaggio, the action always feels personal. He knew about violence, he knew about street fights, and soon he would know about murder too. I won't bore you with all the police records relating to the young Caravaggio in Rome. If I had to provide you with a full list of his misdemeanors, we'd be here all night. He was constantly in trouble with the police, getting into fights, insulting passers-by, owing people money, stabbing people, being stabbed himself. This was an unusually cussed personality. Caravaggio was fond of wearing his sword in the street, which was illegal, and fond of pulling it out when anyone said anything to him, which was even more illegal. And all this violent foreplay came to a head in May 1606 in this street, when two gangs of armed men confronted each other just here. The leader of one of the gangs was Ranuzio Tommasoni, a bellicose man about the taverns who liked to fight. The other gang was led by Caravaggio. Ranuzio and Caravaggio had apparently quarrelled over a tennis match, and now they went head-to-head in a thuggish street squabble with swords, which Caravaggio won by slashing Ranuzio to death when he was down. Thus Caravaggio became the only great artist ever to commit murder. What a grim claim to fame. The police never caught him, though. He fled from Rome and never came back. There was still great art in him, lots of it, but from now on, it was painted on the move. The murder brought him even greater notoriety. People began to hunt about for his earlier works, the stuff he'd hawked in the streets, those heads he'd churned out in threes for a groat at a time. Among these was a most mysterious painting of a boy being bitten by a lizard. And the question began to be asked, what did it really mean? Let's take a closer look at this picture. It's so interesting. What's going on in there? A lizard's been skulking about among the fruit and the flowers. The boy put his finger in there and the lizard bit him. The boy's wearing an off-the-shoulder tunic and there's a rose in his hair. The sheer effeminacy of his outfit identifies him as Bacchus, the Roman god of wine and pleasure, who's often shown as a very girlish boy because Bacchus was the naughtiest of the Roman gods. He drank too much. His followers were notorious for their debauched behaviour, their drunken orgies. Caravaggio painted a number of these Bacchuses, and what an anxious, unhealthy, and pale bunch they are. I've always been terribly fond of this great Bacchus that hangs in the Uffizi. It's the most decadent of all of them, and that's saying something because Caravaggio's Bacchuses are a most decadent lot. What I love about this painting, if you look closely, is that all its subtle meaning is conveyed in the details. Look, for instance, at that glass of wine he's holding in his hand. Look at its surface. Can you see those carefully painted little ripples? What can that possibly mean? I'll tell you what it means. He's had too much wine the night before. He's woken up and his hand is shaking. And everything here underlined this basic message that too much wine, too much of anything, too much of any good thing is bad for you. These Bacchuses have always been some of Caravaggio's most mysterious pictures. Painted in Rome in the 1590s for Cardinal del Monte, they've always been fiercely misunderstood. In particular, people have been interested to find out whether they are all self-portraits or not. In the old days, art historians were agreed. They looked at these dark faces with their arched eyebrows and those puffy little mouths of theirs, and they said, these are all Caravaggio himself. Well, maybe, But what's undoubtedly true is that even if these are not specifically self-portraits, they are evocations of himself, pictures in which his spirit plays the leading role. And in a couple of cases, I'm sure it's him. How do you think an artist trying to produce a face like that would have proceeded? I'll tell you how he would have proceeded. He would have got himself a mirror, looked at himself in that mirror, made that fierce expression, and then painted it. This, surely, is Caravaggio himself. Whenever I look at Boy Bitten by a Lizard, which is as often as I can, I get the feeling that Caravaggio has set out deliberately to pull me into the picture. It's just you and the boy in the dark, a one-to-one drama. He's so close, so touchable, just an arm's length away.
If you look at something like The Boy with the Lizard, there's a petulance about the way he starts back that makes you feel there's a very spoilt person, somebody not used to coping with the difficult things. It's not a sympathetic face at all. And I think that's also part of the interest, that you wonder really what on earth this boy was doing. And I don't think I'm the only person that feels he probably deserved this comeuppance.
In the vase in front of the boy, there's a rose, and there's another one in his hair. Now you know about roses. You've bought them at your florist. They're so gorgeous in the shop, the queen of flowers, and then you bring them home and they wilt. 2 days in the vase and they're kaput. Caravaggio's beautiful rose has a gorgeousness that's so short-lived. The vase is glass, expensive stuff in Caravaggio's day, precious, fragile. You spend all this money on it, yet look how easily it breaks. Here today, gone tomorrow. There's a lovely reflection in the vase of a window. The thing about reflections is that they're fragile too. The sun goes behind a cloud and they disappear. The rose, the glass, the reflection, they're all short-lived, temporary. Just like that, and they're gone. A bit like life, you might say. 1 minute, you're a young boy who loves to party, and I speak here from personal experience, and the next, you're a clapped-out old man. But what about the lizard? What's he doing in the picture? Indeed, what's he doing in all the many pictures in which he appears? Have you ever bought a new car, gone out on the motorway with it, and suddenly realised that everybody else seems to be driving one? It certainly happened to me, and it's an illusion, of course. All it really means is that you've noticed it for the first time. Now, the lizard in art is rather like that. Once you've found one in a picture, they seem to pop up everywhere. The best place to look for them is at the bottoms of still lives, around the foot of the vase, on the top of the table. Here's a good example of just one of those situations. This is a painting by one of Caravaggio's more mysterious contemporaries. He's known only as the Hartford Master. It's an absolute treasure trove of vegetable painting, and that's what you see, first of all, when you look at it. But then, look more carefully. Right in the middle, skulking about again in the darkness, a pair of lizards locked in gladiatorial combat. So what are these lizards doing there, skulking about in the darkness of so many still life paintings? Well, they're echoes of the most famous of all the biblical stories, the story about man's expulsion from paradise. If you remember, Adam and Eve were thrown out of paradise because they listened to Satan's temptation and did things they shouldn't have done. Satan came down to Eve as a snake. Well, in Caravaggio's times, the snake has become a lizard.
If you look at The Boy with the Lizard, most people looking at that picture would actually feel that the lizard was a great deal less evil than the boy. I mean, most of us think are on the side of the lizard in this one, which is quite an odd achievement. And that's clever about Caravaggio, that he takes this convention of man and snake, which from the earliest myths is about evil and sex, and turns it all round and leaves you very uncertain about what you think about it all.
But there's something else we need to examine. The actual finger that's being bitten by the lizard. Does this finger have any particular meaning?
The middle finger is our prime insult today, and it was referred to by the Romans as digitus impudicus, the impudent finger. Of all the Italian gestures that we study, what we discover is that this gesture, the digitus impudicus, is probably the most ancient of them all. When we curl the other fingers back in order to emphasize the middle digit, everything else curls back and looks rather like a scrotum. So it's prime candidate for any kind of emasculatory phallic gesture.
So it's a substitute penis in that sense?
Oh, very much so, absolutely. Today, it's a rather emasculatory gesture. It says, look what I'm going to do to you. And it can be used playfully. In the ancient world, that wasn't the case. It was extremely serious, and it was used in a slightly different fashion. This is how it was done, palm down, and it was a way of saying, see that person there? I'm not pointing at them with my index finger to indicate who they are. I'm telling you that they have a homosexual inclination. It's a gay gesture. That person there is homosexual.
Caravaggio and homosexuality is a wasp's nest, and I'm steering clear of it. But whichever side of the court this boy plays from, his finger has certainly strayed and been bitten as a result. The message is obvious. Watch out where you stick your digitus impudicus, because this is a painting about temptation. It's a painting that sets out to remind us of the brevity of sensual pleasure. Look how quickly it fades, like the flower, like the reflection, like youth itself. But there's one more thing we need to think about that's crucial. Okay, boy bitten by a lizard is a warning about the transience of earthly pleasures, a reminder of the shortness of life. It's all of those things. But here in Rome, where it was painted, that message has a particular pertinence. Here in Rome, wherever you turn a corner, you encounter irrefutable evidence of how quickly good fortune can fade. Caravaggio could have painted any young man having his finger bitten and made the same point about the passing of youth, but he deliberately painted Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, who drank too much and lived too fast. Why? Well, look around you here. This is what became of the Roman Empire when decadence set in. Caravaggio's picture was a warning to his own times. This is what happens to you if you don't watch it. There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one of them.